Hello everyone, Jeff Murrin here, broadcasting to you from an Airbnb. I'm on the road, so I'm going to keep this going though, even while I'm on the road. What we have been discussing and what we will continue to discuss in this video is the book, The Odyssey, specifically the Robert Fagel's translation of the book. This video specifically looks at book 9, which is titled In the One-Eyed Giant's Cave. This is one of the most important books, I believe, to where we get to see what Odysseus did that got him so sideways, if you will, with Poseidon. Why is Poseidon so upset with Odysseus? Why has he sent him so far off course and made him deal with so much hardship? Well, this is it. This is where it all comes from. This is a story where we get to see some of Odysseus' personality. Up until this point, Odysseus has been considered to be the most clever. Tactful has been a word that is used in this text to describe Odysseus. Always the man who knows how to talk his way out of any circumstance. And that is what he's often known as, the clever Odysseus. Now, there is one thing that overrides Odysseus's quick wit, and that is his pride. His pride seems to be the undoing of his otherwise sharp mind. So what I'm saying is, he can be considered brilliant or tactful or clever or wily to figure out a way to get through a situation. However, he's so prideful, and we see that pride here, that pride gets in the way and actually causes, or I don't want to say causes, but it unravels what would otherwise be a pretty good plan. All right, so that is, I would say, his main character flaw, is his pride screws up any progress he would have otherwise made. Now, I didn't bring this up in these videos. Of course, if you're in my class, I definitely have brought this up by now. I would have brought this up before we ever even started reading this. This is something that I mentioned in book 1 of the, video 1 on book 1 of the Iliad. Greek stories are told in media res, and that means that we start in the middle of things, okay? When we begin this tale, Odysseus is already lost. Odysseus is already, the Trojan War is over, and Odysseus has been on this circuitous route to get home for 10 years or so. It's not that it starts at the end and we follow him in this linear path, okay? If this is the story, we start right here. And as the story progresses this way, we get a little bit of information back here to kind of fill us in on what happened, all right? And that's what you're going to see here. Alcinous and the people of Phaeacia want to hear where Odysseus has come from. And so he's saying, all right, this is how I landed on your shore, okay? Let me give you my backstory. And that backstory fills us in to the present. And then once we get caught up, we'll take it from there on out. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to start at the beginning, which is on page 211. Odysseus, the great teller of tales, launched out on his story. Usually it's, raider of cities, or it's the tactful, or whatever the case may be. In this case, because he's getting ready to tell this great story, he is known as Odysseus the great teller of tales. He says, Alcinous, Majesty, shining among your island people, what a fine thing it is to listen to such a bard as we have here. The man sings like a god, the crown of life, I'd say. As I mentioned in the last video, he's referring to Demodocus. And those people who believe that Homer was a real person, a blind storyteller, a blind singer, a blind performer, just like Demodocus, the idea is that Homer wrote himself into the story of the Odyssey, and here he has the titular character, essentially, praising him. All right. So, anyway, I'm going to move on here. Odysseus actually tells the Phaeacian people his name. He tells them straight up on line 21, I am Odysseus, son of Laertes, known to the world for every kind of craft. I'm crafty. My fame has reached the skies. Quite a boast. All right. He goes on about line 33. He says, true enough, Calypso, the lustrous goddess, tried to hold me back, deep in her arching caverns, craving me for a husband. So did Circe. That's a new one. We haven't heard about Circe just yet. Holding me just as warmly in her halls, the bewitching queen of Aea, keen to have me too. But they never won the heart inside of me. Never. So nothing is as sweet as a man's own country, his own parents, even though he's settled down in some luxurious house off in a foreign land and far from those who bore him. So this is pointing out that even though Odysseus could have had that life of luxury with Calypso, and now we hear about Circe, that's not truly what he wanted. That's not really what life is about. He mentions his men and he fighting with the Cicones and how that played out. All right. One thing I do want to point out is on 214, the lotus eaters. This is another group of people that he comes across. He and his men come across on their travels. I've never read, I'll admit it, I've never read Percy Jackson. Maybe I should. If I'm going to be teaching these, maybe I should. My students have all read them, or not all, but many of my students have read them. And these guys, I guess, appear and are... my students always seem to chuckle when we get to this and go, oh, I remember that from Percy Jackson. Line 92. 9 whole days I was borne along by rough, deadly winds on the fish-infested sea. Then on the 10th our squadron reached the land of the lotus eaters, people who eat the lotus, mellow fruit and flower. We disembarked on the coast, drew water there, and crewmen snatched a meal by the swift ships. Once we had our fill of food and drink, I sent a detail ahead, 2 picked men and a third, a runner, to scout out who might live there. Men like us, perhaps, who live on bread. So off they went, and soon enough they mingled among the natives, lotus eaters. Lotus eaters who had no notion of killing my companions, not at all. They simply gave them the lotus to taste instead. Any crewman who ate the lotus, the honey-sweet fruit, lost all desire to send a message back, much less return. Their only wish to linger there with the lotus eaters, grazing on lotus, all memory of the journey home dissolved forever. So it's almost like they went with the lotus eaters, were fed that lotus plant, that lotus nectar, whatever there, and just lost all sense of anything. It's like they just became, just high and content on whatever the lotus eaters gave them. And it's interesting because he just said, no matter what luxury, a man can have, truly his own homeland is what he strives for, because that's where he truly finds himself. But whatever the lotus eaters gave these guys, it was even more powerful, it seems, right, than anything that Calypso ever offered Odysseus. It goes on the last 2 lines of 214. From there we sailed on, our spirits now at a low ebb, and reached the land of the high and mighty Cyclops, lawless brutes, who trust so to the everlasting gods they never plant with their own hands or plow the soil. Unsown, unplowed, the earth teems with all they need, wheat, barley and vines, swelled by the rains of Zeus to yield a big full-bodied wine from clustered grapes. They have no meeting place for counsel, no laws either. No, up on the mountain peaks they live in arching caverns, each a law to himself, ruling his wives and children, not a care in the world for any neighbors. Even says down there on line 138, the Cyclops have no ships with crimson plows. So they are these sort of, people who live off the land, but the land is described, all down this page as Eden-like. Everything is just offered them. Everything is there. It's just, for their taking. Lawless. They set their own rules for themselves. All right? So they're not a communal people necessarily. Okay? They know one another, but they're not building a society. Okay? Page 216, it says, when young Dawn with her rose-red fingers shone once more, we all turned out, intrigued to tour the island. The local nymphs, the daughters of Zeus himself, flushed mountain goats so crews could make their meal. Okay, so they're being taken care of while they're on this island. Quickly we fetched our curved bows and hunting spears from the ships, and splitting up into 3 bands, we started shooting, and soon enough some god had sent us bags of game to warm our hearts. A dozen vessels sailed in my command, and to each crew 9 goats were shared out, and mine alone took 10. Then all day long, till the sun went down, we sat and feasted well on sides of meat and rounds of heady wine. All right. But then we have another day here, beginning on line 190. When young Dawn with the rose-red fingers shone once more, I called a muster briskly, commanding all the hands. The rest of you stay here, my friends in arms. I'll go across with my own ship and crew and probe the natives living over there. What are they? Violent, savage, lawless, or friendly to strangers? God-fearing men. Okay, so he mentioned earlier the Cyclopses and how they were, okay? He knows this now because he's been there. Where we are right here, he hasn't met the Cyclopses yet. So he's going over to see what are they all about. Interesting here too, friendly to strangers, God-fearing men. That idea of xenia, to be considered a godly person, you took in the strangers. That's how it was. Line 201. But as soon as we reached the coast, I mentioned no long trip. We spied a cavern just at the shore, gaping above the surf, towering, overgrown with laurel. And here big flocks, sheep and goats were stalled to spend the nights. And round its mouth a yard was walled up with quarried boulders sunk deep in the earth, and enormous pines and oak trees looming darkly. Here was a giant's lair, in fact, who always pastured his sheep flocks far afield and never mixed with others. So this person is a loner amongst loners. A grim loner, it says. Dead set in his own lawless ways. Here was a piece of work, by God, a monster built like no mortal who ever supped on bread. No, like a shaggy peak, I'd say, a man mountain, rearing head and shoulders over the world. Then I told most of my good trusty crew to wait, to sit tight by the ship and guard her well, while I picked out my frozen. Now then, I told most of my good trusty crew to wait, to sit tight by the ship and guard her well, while I picked out my dozen finest fighters, and off I went. But I took a skin of wine along, the ruddy, irresistible wine that Marin gave me once. Now, you need to remember this wine, because this wine does come into play and is very important once we do meet up with the Cyclops. Page 218. Line 241, we find that Odysseus's men can resist anything but temptation, that is. All right. Our party quickly made its way to his cave, but we failed to find our host himself inside. He was off in his pasture, ranging his sleek flocks. So we explored his den, gazing wide-eyed at it all. the large flat racks loaded with drying cheeses, the folds crowded with young lambs and kids, split into three groups. Here the springborn, there the mid-yearlings, and here the fresh suckling off to the side. So all of his livestock that he has that weren't out with him, some of them were still in the cave. Each sort was penned apart, and all his vessels, pails and hammered buckets he used for milking, were brimming full with whey. From the start, my comrades pressed me, pleading hard, "Let's make away with the cheeses, then come back. Hurry, drive the lambs and kids from the pens to our swift ship, put out to sea at once." But I would not give way, and how much better it would have been not till I saw him, saw what gifts he'd give. But he proved no lovely sight to my companions. All right, so he's like, they're just like, "Hey, let's just take all this stuff for ourselves and get it in there." And he's like, "I don't know. This guy may be a generous, kind soul." But there we built a fire, set our hands on the cheeses, so they went ahead and they helped themselves, offered some to the gods, and ate to the bulk ourselves, and settled down inside, awaiting his return. And back he came from pasture late in the day, herding his flocks home, and lugging a huge load of good dry logs to fuel his fire at supper. Skipping down to 271, it says, "Then to close his door," this is very important, "then to close his door, he hoisted overhead a tremendous massive slab. No 22 wagons, rugged and four-wheeled, could budge that boulder off the ground, I tell you. Such an immense stone the monster wedged to block his cave." All right, so that's how strong and powerful and huge this guy is. All right, this is he walls off his cavern there with a slab of stone so big that there's no way that Odysseus and Odysseus's men could ever do anything with it. He says about 285, the Cyclops himself, he says, "Strangers," he thundered out, "now who are you? Where did you sail from over the running sea lanes? Out on a trading spree, or roving the waves like pirates, sea wolves raiding at will, who risked their lives to plunder other men?" The hearts inside us shook, Odysseus says. So he tries to appease this giant. About line 97. "We're glad to say we're men of Atrides Agamemnon, whose fame is the proudest thing on earth these days. So a great city he sacked, such multitudes he killed. But since we've chanced on you, we're at your knees in hopes of a warm welcome." In hopes of a warm welcome. Even a guest gift, the sort that hosts give strangers. That's the custom. Respect the gods, my friend. We're suppliants at your mercy. Zeus of the strangers guards all guests and suppliants. Strangers are sacred. Zeus will avenge their rights. All right, so he's kind of using a little bit of lawyer type, we've come here waiting to hear from you. You're supposed to give us gifts because that's the way it's supposed to be. That's what Zeus commands. Zeus takes the side, I guess, of the stranger. Here's his response, the Cyclops' response. "Stranger," he grumbled back from his brutal heart, "you must be a fool, stranger, or come from nowhere, telling me to fear the gods or avoid their wrath. We Cyclopses never blink at Zeus and Zeus's shield of storm and thunder or any other blessed god. We've got more force by far. I'd never spare you in fear of Zeus's hatred, you or your comrades here, unless I had the urge." So, Odysseus, his men, out of luck in that regard. Just straight up out of luck. So he's like, "So how did you get here? Whatever. Where's your ship? Blah, blah, blah." On 318, Odysseus says, "My ship? Poseidon, god of the earthquake, smashed my ship. He drove it against the rocks at your island's far cape. He dashed it against a cliff as the winds rode us in, and I and the men you see escaped a sudden death." I'm not going to tell you where my ship is. I'm going to make up some story. Little does he know that Poseidon is the Cyclops' father. So he's kind of like saying, your dad did it. He's not really aware of that just yet. All right? But here, check this out. Check out what the Cyclops does. Just right after that. It says, lurching up, he lunged out with his hands towards my men, and snatching two at once, wrapping them on the ground, he knocked them dead like pups. Just wham, bam, killed them instantly. Their brains gushed out all over. Oh yes, it's going to get gruesome. Their brains gushed out all over, soaked to the floor, and ripping them limb from limb to fix his meal, he bolted them down like a mountain lion, left no scrap, devoured entrails, flesh, bones, marrow, and all. Just eats two of his men like that. All right? And they're like, oh boy, you know, they're like, how are we going to get out of here? There's no way we can get that rock off the, you know, to open up the cave there. What are we going to do? All right. You see, he's going to eat more men. All right. 348. It says, he snatched up two more men and fixed his meal. Well fed, he drove his fat sheep from the cave, lightly lifting the huge door slab up and away, then slipped it back into place as a hunter flips the lid of his quiver shut. So it's nothing for him. All right. So while he's gone, the Cyclops, he's left for the day. Odysseus and his men are still in this cave. And the Cyclops has left a club behind. And a club, it mentions the club to the Cyclops is like a mast of a ship. That's how huge it is. So what they do is they take a little bit of it and they whittle it down and they fashion it into a spear. They actually, you know, burn it over a fire to get it nice and hard and as a weapon to defend themselves, I guess you could say. All right. So the Cyclops comes back. 383. It says, and as soon as he briskly finished all his chores, he snatched up two more men and fixed his meal. Two more guys eat. That's 6 now if you're counting. But this time I lifted a carved wooden bowl brimful of my ruddy wine. There's that wine coming in, okay? And went right up to the Cyclops, enticing, here, Cyclops, try this wine to top off the banquet of human flesh you've bolted down. Judge for yourself what stock your ships stored. I brought it here to make you a fine libation, hoping you would pity me, Cyclops. Send me home. But your rages are insufferable. You barbarian, how can any man on earth come to visit you after this? What you've done outrages all that's right. It's like, I'm going to give you this wine, but I totally disapprove of what you're doing. I had expected you to give me gifts. I'm going to be the good guest, sort of, all right, after eating the stuff that you left behind, and give you this wine. At that, he seized the bowl and tossed it off. Boom. Just one, like taking a shot of whiskey or something. And the heady wine pleased him immensely. More, he demanded, a second bowl, a hearty helping. And tell me your name now quickly, so I can hand my guest a gift to warm his heart. Our soil yields the Cyclops' powerful, full-bodied wine, and the rains from Zeus but it build its strength. But this is nectar, ambrosia. This flows from heaven. So he really likes this stuff. It says, I poured him another fiery bowl. 3 bowls I brimmed, and 3 he drank to the last drop. The fool. And then, when the wine was swirling around his brain, I approached my host with a cordial, winning word. So, you asked me my name? I'm known by Cyclops. This is something that is a clever little twist he does. I will tell you, but you must give me a guest gift, as you've promised. Nobody. That's my name. Nobody. So my mother and father call me all my friends. All right? So, that's what he says. I'm nobody. Don't worry about it. But then, very shortly after that, the Cyclops vomits up human flesh because he's so drunk and passes out. And when that happens, line 422, Odysseus goes to work. He says, courage, no panic, no one hang back now. And green as it was, just as the olive stake was about to catch fire, the glow terrific, they've got that poker, remember that thing, that weapon that they made in the fire. The glow terrific, yes, I dragged it from the flames, my men clustering around as some god breathed a more enormous courage through us all, hoisting high that olive stake with its stabbing point, straight into the monster's eye they rammed it, hard. I drove my weight on it from above and bore it home as a shipwright bores its beam with a shipwright's drill at men below, whipping the strap back and forth, whirl, and the drill keeps twisting faster, never stopping. So we seized our stake with its fiery tip and bored it round and round in the giant's eye, till blood came boiling up and around that smoking shaft, and the hot blast singed his brow and eyelids round the core, and the broiling eyeball burst. Its crackling roots blazed and hissed as a blacksmith plunges a glowing axe or adds in an ice-cold bath, and the metal screeches steam and its temper hardens. That's the iron strength. So the eye of the Cyclops sizzled around that stake. So they get him drunk. He passes out. When he passes out, they take a stake, red hot poker, and just ram it through his eye. Odysseus has got a way of doing this while people are asleep, attacking them. All right? It's effective. Is it the right way to handle? Is it a gentlemanly way to win a war? I don't know. I don't know if I'd go that far. But it does have some gruesome details to the story. All right. It says at the top of 224, and we scuttled back in terror. The monster wrenched the spike from his eye, and out it came with a red geyser of blood. So he starts screaming, of course, the Cyclops does. And all these other Cyclops are like, what is going on? What is your problem? Who is giving you like all this hard time that you're freaking out? And the Cyclops yells out, nobody, friends, Polyphemus bellowed back from his cave. Nobody's killing me now by fraud, not by force. So he's saying nobody's doing it. And they're kind of like, okay, nobody's bothering you. Nobody. So they say, if you're alone, his friends boomed back at once, and nobody's trying to overpower you now, look, it must be a plague sent here by mighty Zeus, and there's no escape from that. You'd better pray to your father, Lord Poseidon. If nobody's bothering you, you must be cursed. All right. So there we have the way, like, how did they get out? All right, because got this guy groping around everywhere. And so the way they decide to get out, the way that clever Odysseus figures out the way for them to get out of the cave is to get underneath the sheep and to ride underneath the sheep as the sheep leave the cave. All right. So, as he's groping around, he just feels the tops of the sheep, and the sheep are leaving, and, that's not there. I can't find the men. Well, the men are underneath. Okay. And they get out to their ship. 529, line 529 says, but once offshore, as far as a man's shout can carry, I called back to the Cyclops, stinging taunt. So he can't resist this pride. He's going to taunt the Cyclops here. So Cyclops, no weak coward it was, whose crew you bent to devour there in your vaulted cave. You, with your brute force, your filthy crimes came down on your own head, you shameless cannibal, darting to eat your guests in your own house. So Zeus and the other gods have paid you back. Basically, like, you were such a bad host. You did not practice Xenia, and now, look, you're going to pay the price. So basically, I'm here to fulfill the will of the gods by making sure you get paid back for not being a good host. Okay? It says down there, the last two lines, once we'd plowed the breakers twice as far, again I began to taunt the Cyclops, and the men around me trying to check me, calling me left and right, like, so headstrong, like, shut up, why are you giving him something? We're making a get away. You've done the thing. Why are you giving him such a hard time? Okay. It says, so they begged. That's about line, 556. But they would not bring my fighting spirit around. So here, this is where his pride comes out. He wants to take credit for what he's done. He wants everyone, especially the Cyclops, to know, I'm not satisfied with you thinking nobody did this. I want you to think that all this clever stuff that happened, I want you to know Odysseus did it. I don't like being a nobody. All right? He says, I called back with another burst of anger. Cyclops, if any man on the face of the earth should ask you who blinded you, shamed you so, say Odysseus, raider of cities. He gouged out your eye, Laertes' son, who makes his home in Ithaca. It's almost like, my name is Odysseus, this is my dad's name, I'm from here, here's my social security number, my ATM PIN number, everything, just so you know I'm the one who did it. That's dumb. But it's that pride that took over, all right? Because the Cyclops says, just skipping like 3 lines, says, we once had a prophet here, a great tall man, Telemus, Eurymus' son, a master at reading signs who grew old in his trade among his fellow Cyclopses. All this he warned me would come to pass someday, that I'd be blinded here at the hands of one Odysseus. But I always looked for a handsome giant man to cross my path, some fighter clad in power like armor plate. But now, look at what a dwarf, a spineless, good-for-nothing, stuns me with wine, then gouges out my eye. All right, come here, Odysseus. Let me give you a guest gift and urge Poseidon, the earthquake god, to speed you home. I am his son, and he claims to be my father, true, and he himself will heal me if he pleases. No other blessed god, no man can do the work. All right, and then he prays, the Cyclops does, prays to his father Poseidon. On the last page there, 1, 2, 3, 4, about 5 lines down, it says, hear me, Poseidon, god of the sea blue mane who rocks the earth. If I really am your son and you claim to be my father, come, grant that Odysseus, raider of cities, Laertes' son, who makes his home in Ithaca, whose social security number is this, whose ATM PIN number is this, whatever, okay, make sure that he never reaches home, or if he is fated to see his people once again and reaches his well-built house in his own native country, let him come home late and come a broken man, all shipmates lost, alone in a stranger's ship, and let him find a world of pain at home. Because we know the suitors are at home. We know that they're getting restless and they're bleeding Ithaca dry. Okay, we know he's not going to be on his own ship. The Phaeacians are going to be the ones who are going to take him home. All of this stuff that Poseidon is, not Poseidon, but the Polyphemus, the Cyclops, is praying to his father right now. All of that will come to pass. This is where it starts. This is where we see why Odysseus is having such a hard time on his trip. All right, so that's book 9. I want you to read book 10. I want you to annotate book 10. I want you to have your own unique individual thoughts on book 10. And I want you to meet me back here and I'll give you my individual unique thoughts on book 10. All right? So, until then, and as always, happy reading.